Hi, welcome to the bathtub, where when you hear this music, and we stop it really quick because we're afraid of getting sued, and you see the words classical gas up here on the whiteboard, then you know it's another hard-hitting, widely popular episode of Classical Gas. That's the title. That's the title, and that's what we call it. And it's basically we investigate whether famous works of literature are actually worth reading or not. Now, there's only one. We only have one criteria here at the bathtub. If it can be read in the bathtub, it's worth reading. If you can't read it in the bathtub, it's not worth reading. So it doesn't matter if it's Ulysses or Mickey Spillane. If you really enjoy reading it just for pure pleasure, then it must be worth reading. And so we're doing this one. It actually should be called Tolstoy or Dostoevsky because I'm doing a totally aimless reading ramble through both of these writers. I'm planning to anyway. Remembering this book I read years and years ago called Tolstoy or Dostoevsky. I don't know if you need to read it or not. I enjoyed reading it when I read it. The premise always stuck in my head, which is that Steiner basically said, here's two writers often compared to one another, but they're actually very, very different, and they appeal to different things in us, and it's possible to like one and not like the other, and sometimes your opinions change over the life, and I think that's happened with me. Before I go into it, I also don't want to forget the proper pronunciation, because I have a lot of pronunciation obsessives out there. It's actually pronounced. Most people who went to grad school call him Dostoevsky. The proper Russian pronunciation is Doistuh-voisky. So if you want to show off how clever you are, refer to him as Doistuh-voisky, and you will turn heads in the Russian community because they'll say, oh, they must really understand this great writer. I wanted to show you this. This is my vaccine. I got my COVID-19 vaccine. I can't tell you any more than that because I don't want my identity to be stolen by anybody, but that's my vaccine card. And somebody, our bathing buddy out in Northern Ireland, Andy, wanted to see that. So there you go, Andy. All the way out there in Northern Ireland. I'm now COVID-free. I'm heading straight to the strip club. Right after I do this, I'm going to the strip club. I'm going to spend the next few days there. What else has happened? So I've been reading through Dostoevsky for fun, and I went through a little bit of a riff on him, which reminds me, I'm reading the Joseph Frank biography on Kindle, I'm sorry to say. And I've also got the Rosamund Bartlett. It's just like some institutional cover. Rosamund Bartlett's biography of Tolstoy. I started it about 5 years ago when I was reading, I reread War and Peace. I have a very short review of War and Peace. The peace parts are great and the war parts are boring. That's my entire review of that book. I love this biography. It was really well written. It's a very different biography. The Frank book is a much more kind of critical, historical book, and this is just a really well written biography of the man himself. And Tolstoy's a really interesting and likable person. Here, I gotta button this up. I don't want to get you guys all excited. Okay, so that's all the rambling we started with. What I've been reading in the past few weeks was I read The House of the Dead, which was published. I don't even remember when it was published. All I know is it was Dostoevsky or Doistuh-voisky was a fairly young man. He published a couple of books which were fairly popular, and was kind of taken under the wing of, I think his name was Belinsky. He was a big critic at the time, and so he was kind of a famous writer. He got involved with some radical circles, and he was convicted of treason. And I think he was actually marched to the scaffold, as I recall. I haven't gotten to that part in the biography, but I've read about him in the past. And he was given a pardon at the very last minute and sent to a Siberian prison camp, and was there for 4 years, I want to say, and then 4 years he had to go in the military. So it was like his writerly life was just interrupted by this 8 or 10 year nightmare. This is a book that he wrote. The first book I think he finished when he came out. He took notes. They wouldn't allow him to write when he was on this in this prison, and he used to keep these kind of clandestine notes just to remember little stories he heard. This is, interestingly enough, Tolstoy's favorite of Dostoevsky's books. I don't think Tolstoy was that big a fan of Dostoevsky, but he did really like this one. And you can sort of see it's a lot more reportorial. Feels a bit more like reportage. Parts of it sound a lot like Orwell. if Orwell had gone to a Siberian prison camp. There's some really wonderful kind of analysis of the way people deal with one another in this place. The basic premise is that it's kind of like having dogs or kids. You know, when you have a dog and you go to the dog park, you talk to people you would never normally talk to, and you have kids, you meet people you would never talk to. When you go to prison, you hang out with people you just never would have ever met, and there is these kind of extreme personalities, and Dostoevsky's character, it's written as a novel, but it's based on lots of individual events that Dostoevsky recalled. It's about the intensity of this life. And the fact that these people, however horrible they are, and some of them are incredibly horrible. There's one guy who's like known as a child murderer, or he likes to torture kids. Another guy kills his father. I think the narrator's best friend is a guy who was a parricide. And they're basically just other human beings to this guy. They don't seem that much different. It's a really powerful book. And it's not at all like any of the other Dostoevsky. So you don't have too much. You have a little bit. A floral patterned martini glass. We're having a big Manhattan tonight to deal with a big writer. And it's a really powerful book. That's all I can say. I can't really read prison books. I find it pretty difficult. But I got pretty absorbed by this. There's so many great scenes. I won't try to describe them all to you. But it is fairly episodic. One of the scenes I remember the most vividly was they have a Christmas pageant every year. All these thugs and criminals and lowlifes, and the high point of the year is this Christmas pageant they put on. And guys dress up like women and they dance and sing, and everyone becomes a critic. They're all going, "Oh, they love those certain actors. I think he's such a great actor, and he sings so well." And they're all so excited to have this one show for a couple of hours at Christmas, and all having their parts. There's certain people that they think are really good at the stage, and it's a really long, hilarious passage. There's another passage I thought I'd read a really small part, but it kind of gives you a good sense of the kind of Orwell Dostoevsky connection here for me, which is the way Dostoevsky talks about how people who whip people, being whipped and beaten, are one of the regular punishments at this prison. And he's fascinated by how these people who are called the executioners, how the executioners kind of establish a certain sense of power, which is so destructive to everybody in basically in the entire culture. And he says when you have people who are executioners, nobody wants to go near them. But they think of themselves as quite perfectly nice people. They're quite cultured. They like to dress well. They think of themselves as professionals. And he talks about this kind of professionalization of this horrible class of people in the prison system. And I just want to read a little bit of it, because it is, when you see people as tyrants, basically tyrants. You saw that in the end of the Trump administration, being able to murder people and butcher people and send these poor kids, some of these screwed up people into the death chambers and stuff like that. You know, whether they're the Supreme Court or Trump head, that sense of power is what really debilitates us as a culture. I'll just read a little brief passage. Tyranny is a habit. It is able to and does develop finally into a disease. I submit that habit may coarsen and stupefy the very best of men to the level of brutes. Blood and power can make a man drunk. Callous coarseness and depravity develop in him. The most abnormal phenomena become accessible and in the end pleasurable to the mind and the senses. The human being and the citizen perish forever in the tyrant, and a return to human dignity, to repentance, to regeneration becomes practically impossible for him. That these people can never, ever, they just never can improve themselves. They can never make up for the horrible things they did. Ordinary executioners are shunned by polite society, but gentlemen executioners are far from being so. We got a bunch of Supreme Court justices now who are gentlemen executioners. The qualities of the executioner are found in embryonic form in almost every modern person. Sounds just like it's almost a line out of. It sounds such like a line out of Orwell. Wonderful book, powerful book, very relevant to our lives today. The other thing I kept thinking was that in this prison system, when they had these people who had done these horrible crimes and they put them in this terrible camp out in Siberia, they treated them 10 times better than we treat people. The millions of people are in jail, hundreds of thousands of people are in jail for marijuana. I mean, we've actually have a much more brutal criminal system than was described in this, and it was quite upsetting sometimes when you're reading it. Finally, I also read a book I'd never quite got into before, and I wasn't wild about it, but it was I think it was Dostoevsky's second novel, The Double, and he was influenced by Gogol, who's actually a very funny writer too, and it reminded me. There's a story called The Double by Dostoevsky, Doistuh-voisky, and it's about a guy he's got some crummy civil servant job, and eventually another man comes into the office and looks just like him, has his name, and it's just kind of treated as a normal thing. It kind of starts to escalate a sense of insanity in this central character. Like the guy in Notes from Underground, and like many Dostoevsky characters, this guy is just all over the map. So he wants to be a subservient, he wants to be a servant, he wants people to like him, and then he gets arrogant and he gets wild and he wants people to like him and he becomes rude and nasty, and then he goes back to being subservient. He's always jumping all over the place. And it was good. I didn't like it as much as Notes from Underground, but it was worth reading. And it reminded me quite a bit of Dostoevsky's, and this is a big difference between him and Tolstoy. Dostoevsky liked crappy literature. He read he like us at the bathtub. He liked Gothic fiction, and he liked Hoffman's horror stories, and especially as he grew up. And there's a lot of that kind of narrative energy in Dostoevsky that you don't see in Tolstoy. He's a much more careful and a much more discerning and a more literary writer than Dostoevsky. Anyway, I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying reading these. I think I'm going to stop now. I'm going to do a very short a little promo because we're coming up close to the 2,000. We have 2,000 subscribers looming on the horizon, and we're going to have a big special spectacular. So I want to get to that pretty quick. Okay, Doistuh-voisky, Classical Gas. We're going to do some more, maybe go back to Tolstoy, do these 2 biographies, and just off and on whenever I feel like it. Okay, stay safe. Happy bathing. Go get your shot. And tell me about it.